Standing tall. All right, folks, welcome to the Table Underground. We are just getting ourselves set up for a minute, so please be patient. We're trying to get the live stream up online. So just give me 1 sec and we will start our baking. So, sorry, 1 more second. We're just getting set up. We're broadcasting on the New Haven Independent, WNHH 103.5 Community Radio, and on thetableunderground.com and the Table Underground Facebook page. So let's get us started here. And you are joining me from my home kitchen. My son, Ifadayo, is joining us today. You're listening to W103.5 WNHH Community Radio in New Haven, Connecticut. This is the Table Underground, and I'm your host, Tagan Engel. We're digging into stories of food, radical love, and creative social justice. So today is May Day, and before we get started with what we're going to do on the show today, I really want to emphasize that workers, and in particular food workers, are the backbone of our society. People who are farming, many of them are immigrant farmers who are here on H-1N1 visas. People who are working in grocery stores, especially during this pandemic, people who are working in distribution centers, and who really are our frontline workers are very, very important. There are strikes going on all across the country and the globe right now, and please pay attention to how workers are being treated and what companies you are supporting. This is really, really important, and we each can do a lot with our own actions and collectively. So just wanted to start us off with that since we're all about food here on the Table Underground and about social justice. So today is a special day because this is our first broadcast straight out of our house because we're in quarantine. And this is my son, Ayo.
Hello.
Ayo just turned 16, and I thought this was a pretty special opportunity to have a intimate conversation with him and to do a little baking together. So for his birthday, we baked a cake for him. And I realized that the cake that we baked is actually a really great cake to do on during quarantine because it actually happens to be a vegan cake. We're not vegan, but it uses, you don't have to use eggs, you don't need to use milk, and it uses oil instead of butter. So it's a lot less expensive to make than a butter cake with lots of eggs and milk. And I thought I would share some of the tips of how I took this really basic vegan cake and turned it into something a little more delicious with a few tricks. So Ayo has also been really wanting to learn how to cook because he's getting older and going to be out on his own soon. And so I thought this was a great opportunity to do this together. So I'm going to shift the camera so you can see what we're doing down on the counter here. All right. And the first thing that we're going to do is oil the pans. One thing that we've done in our house is try to stop using paper towels. So we cut up some dish towels that we use as paper towels. So Ayo, can you get started wiping these with oil? This cake recipe can either be made in 3 pans like this, 3 round cake pans. It can be made in 1 large cookie sheet pan, the one with the kind of straight sides, or you could make 2 dozen cupcakes with it. So I was going to get started, and especially you want to get the sides, get plenty of oil on there. And if you have parchment paper, you can cut it into circles and put that on in the pan after you have done the oil, like this. Or if you don't have parchment paper, which is not the same as wax paper, do not substitute wax paper. If you don't have parchment, you could dust the pan. You could oil it or butter it and then dust it with flour or cocoa afterwards. So to get us started, we preheated the oven to 350 degrees. And then we're going to get started with the liquid. Now, this cake is sort of like a buttermilk cake, but you don't have to actually use milk. And the important thing is that you're taking a liquid and that you're adding a little acid. So instead of just using water or milk, I actually brewed up some coffee. Now, you could use decaffeinated coffee if you're concerned about caffeine. You can also use something like Cafex, which is like a green coffee substitute, which we call kid coffee in our house. So this is actually 2 cups of coffee. It's with a little bit of milk splashed in for a total of 2 cups. And then buttermilk works in recipes by the acid in buttermilk, or in even a vegan buttermilk, is what activates the baking soda. So we're gonna actually just put a splash, which is about 2 teaspoons of vinegar. You could also use lemon juice. And that is going to be what, we're gonna mix that together, what activates the baking soda in the recipe. Then we're going to add 2/3 of a cup of oil to this. And I like to just put everything into the same mixing cup so that it, you have less things to wash, and you just add. So we started with 2 cups, and now we're gonna add 2/3 of a cup of oil on top of that. You can use any neutral oil like sunflower, safflower, canola, corn oil, peanut oil, and really whatever oil you have. Now we're gonna add 2 cups of sugar. So I like to add brown sugar. That adds a lot of flavor. So both the coffee and the brown sugar are gonna add a lot of flavor to this chocolate cake. And I also mixed in part coconut sugar, which has, so this is out of the 2 cups of sugar, a half cup of it is coconut sugar, and the other cup and a half are brown sugar. You really can do any sugar combination that you like. So I'm gonna mix this in. I'm adding the sugar, let's see if we can see this. I'm adding the sugar into the liquid because it's going to dissolve, oops, and I'm making a mess. It's gonna dissolve better in the liquid than if I mixed it into the flour. So granulated sugar will mix in very easily into the flour, but brown sugar is a little more lumpy. So I find that mixing it into the liquid really helps. The same principle is going to go for our salt. So we're going to add 1 teaspoon of salt. And then we're also going to add 1 tablespoon, and I'm going to steal the measuring spoons from over here, 1 tablespoon of vanilla. All right, and we're going to let that sit while we get our dry ingredients together. So Io, can you mix up the dry ingredients here?
Sure.
All right, so let's get our parchment in. So put parchment on the bottom of each of these first, and then we're going to move these out of the way. So the parchment just looks like that. All right. Now in this larger mixing bowl, you can come over and mix up. We're using 2 cups of flour. So we're going to use 1 cup of white flour and 1 cup of whole wheat flour. The great thing about this chocolate cake is that it hides everything. So you can really use whole wheat flour and not even notice. I'm going to bring over the the cocoa. So we're adding 2/3 of a cup of cocoa. I like to use this darker, this is a mix of a regular and dark cocoa, and that gives the cake a darker color, which is great. Now we need a teaspoon and a half of baking soda. You can get that. And 1 teaspoon of baking powder. So I'm gonna mix this up. 1 teaspoon of, that was the baking soda. You need a teaspoon and a half of baking soda. So get another half teaspoon of that. All right, so we're just mixing this up like this. And another half teaspoon, there you go. And then 1 teaspoon of baking powder. And that's really all it is. You have your liquid, whatever liquid you choose, oil, sugar, flour, cocoa, baking powder, baking soda. That's it. If you wanted to add any spices to this, like cinnamon, even a little chili powder, ginger, whatever you like mixed with your chocolate flavor, you can do that. So now we're just gonna whisk this up, and I'm gonna pour this in. And there you go. All right, once you bring this over here so people can see you mixing, mix it together just until the mix comes together, until the batter comes together. You don't want to over mix batters that have baking powder and baking soda. Mix a little bit more. Yep. This is sort of a nice runny batter, so it's not too hard to mix. I usually use a whisk, but if you just have a spoon or a spatula, that's also great. Can I have a turn at it for a sec? So it's okay to give it a little mix like this. We want to get some of the lumps out. And it's going to start reacting. You can see in here. That's probably good. You can see it's starting to thicken up. That's because the acid in our buttermilk, our vegan buttermilk, is starting to react with the baking soda. So now we're going to fill up our pans. Could you get the other pan? And we're just going to divide this batter between our 3 pans evenly. So I'm going to pour a little bit in here. All right, and a little bit in the next one. And can you grab a rubber spatula from over there? All right. And you want to scrape the batter out of that. All right, there we go. And if you find that they're really uneven, you can take a spoon and scoop some batter into the other pan. So these are going to go in a 350-degree oven, and they'll be in there for about 25 minutes. You know, every oven is a little different. You can put it in the middle rack of the oven or the top rack, definitely not the bottom rack. And you want to test it by putting a toothpick in the middle. And if it comes out without having any cake pieces stuck to it, any batter stuck to it, then you know you're good. So sometimes I usually want to check it around 20 minutes and then check it every couple minutes after that. So let's get these in the oven. You want to open the oven up and I'll hand them over to you. Just slide those in on the middle. 2 of them on the middle shelf and one on the top shelf. There you go. So these cakes are really great because you can layer them together and have them be, you can layer them together and have them be a big layer cake with jam in the middle or some fruit in the middle, chocolate, whatever you like. Or you can also just eat them individually and pour a glaze over them. So we're going to sit down and talk now that we just did that exciting little baking thing. How was that for you?
It was great.
Yeah.
It was much simpler than I anticipated. But
yeah. What did you think it was going to be?
I don't know. Just more steps.
So you had this idea. You've been asking me to teach you how to bake and cook some things because I think you're sort of realizing you're 16 and you're getting a little closer to leaving the house, college, or whatever happens after high school. What kinds of things are you wanting to learn how to cook?
Just things that, I don't know, just things that are easy to remember and that are simple. So whatever limited resources I have, wherever I am able to make good, healthy food, because I love good, healthy food. Things that are simple and taste good and that are good to eat and easy and fast to make. Yeah,
and you had this idea of the freshman 15 that you came up with a couple of years ago. Do you want to explain what that was?
Yeah, so freshman 15 usually refers to freshman year of college, gaining 15 pounds. And usually because you have like an abundance of food, unrestricted access to lots of food, and that food usually isn't very healthy.
Some people do. Lots of people actually don't. But if you're eating in like a school cafeteria and there's like a buffet and stuff, for sure.
So that food's not usually not always the most healthy. So wanting to make like a little book of like 15 recipes that people can use in college or wherever they are after high school that are cheap and easy to make and are healthy.
Yeah. Cool. So I love this idea. And we started to list out a few recipes, but we need to kind of get on what all the recipes are going to be and cooking them together. So we'll definitely keep people posted about that. So I know that you've started to have these realizations that you're getting older, like becoming 16. Next year, you're going to be a junior in high school. You've talked a little bit about wanting to learn different skills. And I'm wondering if you could share a little, like, what are some of the skills that you're wanting to learn or trying to learn to help prepare you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think time management, especially because I plan to go to college after high school. So time management with really being on my own with my work more and doing less work in the classroom and more by myself.
Mm-hmm.
So time management and working on a computer efficiently, I think are two skills that I've been practicing now in quarantine, and that I will definitely be practicing more as years go on in high school and in college. So definitely trying to practice more time management and good skills, like good study habits.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit? I know there's a lot more stuff, and we'll touch on some of the other skills, but I'm realizing like I really want to hear about what your perspective is on this pandemic and being in quarantine. So can you share a little bit first just about for yourself? I mean, I know we are blessed with having a home and having enough money to have food and stuff, and you have a computer to work on for your schoolwork, but can you share a little just what your experience of this has been and how it's affected you?
Yeah. I don't love being on the computer very much. I mean, like, I enjoy it, but it's after a while it really starts to like get to me and make my head start to hurt, and it's not always the most pleasant experience. So
yeah, you've had
that's been really hard.
Yeah.
To be on the computer 7-8 hours every day, doing schoolwork has been really tough and challenging, and a very bizarre adjustment.
You've literally ended the day with headaches a lot of times, even when you take breaks and stuff. It's been like physically painful for you.
Yeah. So that's been really tough. Not seeing people, like my friends and people I see every day, has been a challenge. But social media and texting has been a good way to keep in contact with people, which has been nice. I don't have many Zoom meetings for my classes, so it's been unfortunate that I haven't gotten to see people very much. But social media has been a good kind of substitute for, instead of seeing people on Zoom meetings, I've been either texting people or FaceTime or doing big group chats.
Speak forward just a tiny bit, just a little closer to the speaker. And what have you noticed about I know you've told me a little of just like other friends and other teens, like we've been tight quarantine, like we stay home,
masks outside,
we go for walks, but you're not like hanging out with other people. Even like your grandparents that live next door, we're not hanging out in their house. If we see them outside, we stay at a distance. So we're being pretty strict. What are you noticing about your friends?
I've seen like a super wide variety of how people are responding. Some people are like us, are being super tight and not going outside at all. Some people are being a little more flexible, like maybe like their parents will go and work, and the parents maybe aren't super protective. The parents aren't wearing masks when they're like going out and interacting with people, or they're like having people in their homes who either work at hospitals or who aren't taking proper precautions. And then also seeing people who are just not caring at all and who are just going and hanging out with friends all the time. It's really hard to see, as like me and a lot of other people have been trying very hard to really stick to the quarantine, to really try to make sure that the virus is spread as little as possible. And then to see so many people just like hanging out all together is like, it's really baffling to see.
How does it make you feel?
It's just like it just feels awful, because these people who I kind of expected to make better choices about these things, and like I really understand how hard it is to not see your friends every day, and it's something that we're all going through. But it's just like, it just feels like I wish that they had better insight to sacrifice not seeing your friends for maybe 2 months in hopes that will stop the spread. We can go back to school instead of them just hanging out all the time and potentially elongating quarantine for who knows how long.
Yeah. I've seen such a wide range too when I've gone out. Like that, I'm the only one in the family who goes out to go grocery shopping for us, for grandparents and some other friends, and have been doing some volunteering. But I'm like super careful. And I've been surprised too. There's some people like walking around without masks and just like going about life as usual, and then other people being really careful. So it is surprising to me also.
And you told me about people like coming up to stores and like seeing people and they're wanting to come up and like give you a hug, and just
now
like
at this point nobody's trying to give hugs anymore.
Right,
so that's good. So I know on your birthday you went out into nature. Like this is something that is like really meaningful for you. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, so we live right by a big park, like a block away from a big park in the middle of the city. And we also live in sort of back way walking distance to some water authority nature preserve area. Can you talk a little bit about like going out into nature in either of those spaces and what that is like for you?
Sure. So yeah, I love being in nature. Always have, and it's just like it's a place that I really feel very comfortable and very happy in. I also like mountain biking, which also gets me into nature, and that gets me to those places much quicker than if I was walking. Um, yeah, so on my birthday, I went up to the Water Authority land, not only because that's a much bigger area to walk in and really spend some time in, but also the park isn't always the safest place to be by yourself, which is really unfortunate, but it's just something that's true that it's not always the safest place to go alone. Um,
Which is like so heartbreaking.
Yeah,
and I hate like I try to encourage you to go everywhere in the city and be with every different kind of person in the city, and then like having to tell you you shouldn't go biking alone in the park, because I know so many people who've gotten jumped, who've gotten their bike stolen, that that's like a really hard thing to tell you when we live a block away from a park, and when we just really want to support public spaces. And the challenge is, like we say, you can go if you have another friend to go with, but not going alone. But you often don't have another friend who, sadly, you don't have a lot of friends who also like to go out into nature very much.
Oh, the ones that do live
far away,
or Green Bay, they live.
Yeah. What do you notice about that in terms of like a lot of friends from New Haven not really wanting to go out into nature that much? And what do you think about that?
I think a lot of them enjoy being in nature when they're there, but it's like getting them to like get up from whatever they're doing, or that's more of the struggle. It's not that they don't want. It's not that they don't like being in nature. It's that they won't go by themselves into nature for whatever reason. A lot of them live very deep in the city, so it's not always feasible for them to get to nature. Like, we're so lucky we can walk to these parks in this land, but a lot of them live very deep in the city, or so far away that even if I did want to hang out with them, you would have to drive me, or taking the bus would be a challenge. But for a lot of kids who really don't like being in nature, I think it really varies from person to person why and the reason that they don't like it. I think a lot of it's just I've always been exposed to nature and loved nature since I was a really little kid, and a lot of them haven't, just for whatever reason. So that makes it makes being in nature a little foreign, or a little scary. And I'm not all speaking for everyone. Everyone has their own reasons, but that's really what I've seen, is that if they haven't grown up with it, then they're more comfortable in the city or at home, or doing whatever.
Absolutely. And that's something that's so important, especially with race divides and class divides around being in nature, and helping nature spaces feel safe and have people feel like they see people like them in those spaces, so that it feels comfortable. And we know lots of folks trying to do that work. So do you want to share a little about what you witnessed on your birthday, because that was kind of special?
Yeah. So in the nature preserve, there's these big main paths that are a combination of gravel and dirt, and then pine needles and whatnot. And I was occasionally going off these little paths that go into the woods and then down to the lakes that are there. So I at one point gone off onto one of those paths, and I looked up, and there were these 3 deer staring right at me. It was really, really incredible. And then they kind of stopped and wandered off, and I ended up they say they're really close to me when I saw them, and they crossed the path, and then they went up into the woods on the other side. And there was another trail that went off right next to where they were. So I went off that trail, maybe trying to see them again, or see where they were. And then I ended up kind of following them, all 3 of these deer, for 30 minutes. And I was always very close to them, maybe never farther than 30 feet away, which was
how did that feel for you?
It was so incredible. It just so many animals can either feel they're very frightened of you, or will be a little bit aggressive, but the deer really just seemed very comfortable, and maybe a little bit wary, but they're not fearful, and they're not aggressive, and they're just these beautiful creatures, and they're just so wonderful to see that close. And actually ended up 2 of them went away down to this ravine, so I didn't follow them there, but this other one had stopped to drink some water, so I was able to get closer to that one. and I ended up falling down one for another 30 minutes. So spending like almost an hour with these deer so close was like an experience I've never had before.
Yeah.
It was just so mind blowing. It was incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think inspired you to want to, on your birthday, your choice of what to do was to go out into the woods by yourself for like hours?
Yes. and that was my plan even before quarantine happened. I would want to stay home and then go.
What inspired you to do that?
I kind of like, I really enjoy being around people, but also it can be really tiring. So I really enjoy like just being by myself, and being by myself in nature is always great. So just like for my birthday, really wanting to just go in nature by myself, not have to worry about anything, because I already have so many things on my plate. So just going in nature for a day or a bunch of hours, not worrying about anything at all, just me and just gorgeous water authority land and whatever else. Yeah.
And I know you took your journal with you, which has been like something, a practice and a skill that you have been working on. Can you talk a little bit about like what having a journal does for you, like how you use it and how it helps you?
In nature, or just
anywhere?
In nature, I use it to literally take down what trails I was on. So so I would have a record of where I was if I got too far.
So then, that's great. And then at other times, how do you use it?
I use it a lot as like keeping a record of like what I'm doing and how I'm thinking and what things I'm interested in. So I can, years from now, I can go back and really have a very clear picture of the things I was interested in, what I was thinking about, what I was doing, because I know like looking back at like years ago, I have like a vague picture of the kind of person that I was, but in terms of like kind of looking at personal growth and wanting to grow more in the future, that's really important to really have like a record of where you've been. And that's something that like I've kind of looked back at my old journals, which has been like super cringy, but it's also just really interesting to see like how far I've come in like personal growth and maturing. And so I use it a lot as a record of what I'm doing, but also really as like self-expression and a place to go and vent, write poetry occasionally, which I've been trying to get better at. That's the other side, is also really just having a private place of like self-expression.
Do you find yourself writing about like emotional things, social things that are going on with friends and school and stuff like that too?
Yeah, it can be really useful to help, like, because I can think about things like in my head and try to piece them apart, but really writing them down kind of makes them more concrete in a way that just thinking about them doesn't. And if I'm trying to like think about how to talk to someone about something, writing it down and trying to find like the pros and cons of certain things to say, can be really useful. And just having a really concrete space to have all those different elements of kind of what you're talking about is really useful.
I have loved like watching you kind of come into your young adulthood, and how, parents try to teach things all the time. Like we try to share our values with you around like politics, around social justice issues, around cooking, around relationships, like all these different things. But I really have loved seeing which things you feel connected to and watching you try to have them as practices in your life. And I think a lot on this show about creative social change, and that in a lot of ways, like having practices that really like feed your spirit and soul, and being able to do social change work and be in relationship and be in community through using those practices, so that you're like grounded and clear, or just so that you have like different forms of expression, or you're not getting too stressed out. That like all of those things are part of creative social change work, and like help people be in creative spaces. So I have like loved getting to witness you being in nature, writing poetry, writing in your journal, even doing art, just like making stuff out of found objects and things. And it's just really beautiful to get to watch that happening. So I feel so blessed. So I know that climate change, so you're like really into social change issues, social justice issues, and into being as active as possible. And I know that it's been a struggle sometimes as a teenager to plug in to things that are sometimes run by adults, or even to plug in to things with kids and teens, because maybe there's only a few teens that's something that you want to be part of. I know that climate change is something that you really care about, in as well as like many other issues. Can you talk a little about what you've witnessed around climate change movement issues in New Haven,
Mhm.
and also like race dynamics within that community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so much. Over the summer, I was really a part of the New Haven climate movement, which was felt really good. It was really great to kind of be in a place of like doing really good climate activism, but it was also hard because it was very young and didn't have many members, and it was the adult who was kind of running it had already so much on their plate that it felt like we had to build a lot of it from the ground up, which felt good to do the activism, but it felt so exhausting and like so much pressure to like always have to show up for everything. And I also was doing other things during the summer, so it was really hard to try to balance really wanting to show up for these things, but also knowing that like I would have to build a lot of it and really help build it when I did show up, and wanting to have a space that was already a little bit more functional than that was, and that I could more like kind of like you said like plug into instead of having to feel like I had to build it. So that was my experience with climate movements in New Haven. But in terms of race dynamics and other dynamics in the climate movement, from what I've seen, it's very diverse. There I think there was a good amount of diversity, at least in the New Haven climate movement, and I've been wanting to get more involved in the Sunrise movement in New Haven, which I haven't done yet, but that's something I really want to do. So we'll see how diversity is there. But I know that maybe not in New Haven, but in other places, there can be a real divide where a lot of people who are either more like middle class or a little more privileged, or people who are either Caucasian or people who are like middle class are kind of drawn to climate change or are more present in climate change movements, whereas people of color are usually more in like Black Lives Matter, or a lot of my friends who are Latinx are more drawn to like immigrants' rights or things with Agitarte or other things that help with either undocumented immigrants or just people in their communities, because those are things that they see all the time, and climate change can feel like that advocating for the people in their communities right now who are suffering right now is more pressing than
so the issues around like immigration, around police violence, around racial justice issues and economic justice issues can be really prominent, and that can kind of take front seat in our community, in this community that we live in. And the thing that's important is also that like environmental issues also affect Black and brown people at higher rates than white folks. And
Absolutely,
so it's like it's so important that those movements be diverse, racially diverse, economically diverse movements. And I think they're starting to become more like coalitions of like all these different groups working together. Like today for May Day, we see like a whole bunch of different social justice groups that are all coming together to fight for workers' rights. So there's like ULA, Unidad Latina en Acción, and Jewish Voices for Peace, and Sunrise Movement, and like all these different movements. They're all coming together to work on, and like New Haven Legal Aid and other groups that are working on issues and working intersectionally. So that's like really important. In the vein of this, like, I would love to hear some things about your experience as being a racially mixed teenager who is white presenting. So your dad is Black, I'm white and Jewish. We have all kinds of stuff mixed in our family. Can you share a little bit about just like, how do you think about your identity and what is your experience in our city in terms of race?
Absolutely, yeah. So my ancestry and ethnicity versus like the color of my skin is something that I've like always thought about and been conflicted about, and had it's a very complicated thing that all things about like my ancestry made me feel like a person of color, and that like my dad is Black and you're white and Jewish, and that makes me a mixed person. But the fact that I'm white presenting, especially in New Haven and I think every other place that I've been, people either can't grasp the fact that I can be a person of color and white presenting, or they just deny it altogether, which I think is just baffling. But it's always been really hard trying to like knowing that people don't recognize me as a person of color, and then sometimes like maybe not feeling like a person of color because I don't suffer the same injustices that my friends and my dad and other people of color face with racial profiling because I am white presenting, and just dealing with that, with trying to find who I am, and how I kind of exist in a world that is so like ravaged by racism, where I fit in conversations about racism, because there's been times where like there's been circles like saying that, okay, if you're Caucasian, if you're white, come over here and we'll talk about racism from the perspective of people who are privileged and who are put in positions of power by racism. And over here we'll have Black people who are oppressed by racism. And I've always been caught in the middle because I do have the privilege of being white presenting. So I kind of fit into that circle of white people and talking about racism as being privileged by it, but also I can't deny all the parts of me that are African American, that make me a person of color. And I feel like going into the white space kind of denies all of my complexity in being a person of color, and my family and all the things about me that really kind of tie me to the other end of my ancestry. So I've always been caught in the middle and not really known my place in these conversations.
Do you get to talk about this at school in like, I know you have like facing history council and curriculum that deals with like identity issues, and your school has, you're at a public high school in New Haven, but your school is a small school and does tend to have more spaces for these kind of conversations than some schools. Do you get to talk about this at all with other students?
Actually, yeah. In my I'm taking a literature elective on power, identity, and Americana. So for I think maybe 1 unit or two ago, we made slideshows about our identity, and I made one about my ethnicity. So I talked about this complexity in that class, and it was really interesting to hear other people's kind of reactions to my presentation. And I have always really enjoyed talking about race and ethnicity and just all these issues that surround them. And so it was really, really great to actually finally have a space in school to talk about those things. And people really received it really well. And I find that people kind of have always received it well, but it just, it's really hard to feel like that the only way I can be recognized as a person of color, that I can be recognized for kind of my ancestry and who I am, is in these very controlled spaces or with a lengthy conversation about my ancestry and my race. It's going to be exhausting. But so it felt really good, but also it's sad that those are really the only spaces that I can really be recognized in.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go check the cake in the oven. I'm wondering if you could talk, just while I go do that, talk a little bit about your experience. You are a part of the STARS program at Planned Parenthood. So you're sort of like a peer educator. Can you talk just a little bit about like what that experience has been like for you? And I'll be right back. Great. You can tell the audience.
Yes. So STARS stands for Students Teaching About Responsible Sexuality. And the program really focuses on teaching students about responsible sexuality. So we in the STARS program are taught by our mentors about different aspects of safe sex, birth control, all the arguments around abortion and abortion rights. And the whole program is through Planned Parenthood. So we go to Planned Parenthood for our discussions. And so teaching about safe sex, responsible sexuality, abortion, birth control, also a lot in the LGBTQIA+ community, and learning about just all the complexity of gender and gender identity as it alone, and as it ties into to sex and sexuality. So we in the STARS program are taught these things and do workshops on them, but we also, part of our responsibility is to go out into our schools and our communities and educate others. So whether that means handing out contraceptives like condoms or lube or whatever else there is, or answering questions people have about anything that has to do with what we've been taught is part of that program. And it's just been an amazing experience. There's kids from, I think, nearly every school in the district are at STARS in the New Haven chapter. And yeah, it's been really great just learning about sex, sexuality, topics that are not taught in school. Like most things that I've learned about safe sex and responsible sexuality have come from STARS. So it's really not taught in schools at all until senior year, just because the way the curriculum is set up. It's not taught until senior year, and middle school health class was useless.
Yeah, does it feel more comfortable? Like, me and your dad will like talk to you about this stuff, but does it feel better to like get to talk about this with someone who isn't your parent? Like when you
absolutely, yes, of course, yeah. I mean, like of course I trust you and Papa, but like it's really good to have like other people besides your parents to like talk about things with, ask questions, and also have peers you can talk with. Especially because like we're really comfortable talking about sex and sexuality, and a lot of teens and grown adults aren't. And so it's really great to have a space where people are comfortable talking about things like this.
Yeah. What kinds of things do people come and ask you about or need help with?
Just that there's
like other teenagers.
Yeah. There's people have come and asked me for like condoms or whatever. People have asked me for relationship advice. I've talked about I've gone to a few GSA meetings, which usually means Gay Straight Alliance, but in our school it's been changed to the Gender Sexuality Alliance. So talking about gender and sexuality and the LGBTQ plus movement. But it's a lot of it's just either about like relationship things, or there's so many myths about sex. So really it's like educating people on those and kind of talking about STIs, sexually transmitted infections, risk in different sexual things, and getting tested for STIs and birth control are two big ones.
Yeah, I love that you're getting to do this program, and that like awesome people who grew up in New Haven are leading it. So it's really cool. Before we finish, because we're going to finish really soon, I just wanted to invite you to talk a little bit about part of the mixedness and complexity of our family is that we have both the Jewish religion and the Yoruba or Orisha tradition as part of our family practice. That both, that I'm a practitioner in both of those things, and your dad is a priest in the Orisha tradition, a Babalao, and then also practices within Judaism in our family. And just how did those practices help you in your life, or like what do you enjoy about those practices in your life?
Yeah, so I had a bar mitzvah when I was 13. Yeah, so that was just a really great experience to really learn really deeply about this text that I did I think it was in Leviticus, just talking about priests and what is cleanliness in priesthood and sacred, and really finding a Jewish perspective on kind of like sanctity and cleanliness. And that was just a really interesting way that I've never really looked at Judaism in terms of like the rules for priests and the temple. So that was just my specific portion of the Torah that I was reading. So that was a really great thing to just read and learn and read commentary on. It was really great. Reading Hebrew, it doesn't use English letters, and in the Torah there's no vowels. So that was really a wonderful challenge to really learn how to read and chant from the Torah, and having both a religion that is monolithic, like Judaism, and another word?
Monotheistic.
Monotheistic, and also having the Yoruba tradition, which isn't. So
we sometimes think of it like it's not necessarily polytheistic. It's because Olodumare is the high god that you could think of in the same kind of idea as the way that Judaism and Islam and Christianity think of God in a certain way. And then you have Orisha, which are sort of elements of the divine. So you could look at them as different deities and divinities, or they also there's also other complexity in it, because I think people often sort of demonize polytheistic religions, and I think it's a little more complex than most people usually think about it. But
and also like Orisha doesn't fully translate to like God, and there's things in there. But yeah, so learning about throwing bar mitzvah and just being at temple, just is really great to really learn about Judaism and the Torah. And then with Orisha, I've been wanting to learn more about that recently, because for the kind of first part of my religious experience in life was focused on Judaism and having bar mitzvah. And
in terms of more structural learning.
Yes, in terms of more structural learning, and really choosing to go to temple. And after that ended, and now especially, I've been wanting to learn more about Orisha and kind of all the complexity of that, and the readings and writings and songs and prayers, because it's like so Orisha feels much more connected to nature, and I love and feel super connected to nature. So praying in nature and like praying with the Orisha versus praying to God in terms of nature and being in the world and in the forest and in nature feels connected in a much different way than with God and Judaism. So I really wanted to learn more about Orisha to foster my connection to nature.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thing, because one of the things that I love when you really get into Judaism, and also the mystical components of Judaism, but really like it's an agricultural based and like earth-based tradition as well, and that we often lose a lot of that connection because our society is not very connected to nature. So we don't often draw out the parts of the religion that are really connected to nature. Whereas in the Orisha tradition, each different Orisha is connected to an element of nature. And so it is very prevalent in just the way that people connect with the Orisha and pray and make offerings. And I love that we get to do that in our family, and that we go out into nature to do that. And it's also really beautiful that part of your connection to being in nature is through learning practices in this traditional West African religion, and how that is on the African continent, not just how that is in this continent, as well as practices from this area. So I think that's super, super beautiful. Is there anything else you want to share about turning 16 and any?
I don't know, just like it's feeling like junior year, which feels like really like getting ready to apply for colleges and things like that. That just like it's always been kind of like off in the distance, and college felt like off in the distance, and being an adult has always felt very like it'll come. Like, it was known that it'll come, but never really like you would know something and not really wrap your head around it. And now it's like feels very much more like here, like getting a driver's license and being an adult and going to college, and that just feels very more now than I think it ever has before.
What are you noticing about friends? Like, are some of your friends really struggling right now with kind of getting older and responsibilities or challenges in their homes and communities?
Yeah, so like, well, some of them are dealing with it well, and some aren't. But like, just the way that different people handle this like independence that they have has been interesting to see. Because my school is relatively small, so I'm friends with a lot of the seniors. So it's been really interesting to see their kind of journeys into adulthood and dealing with all those responsibilities. And some of them have like already moved out of their parents' house for whatever reason, whether for good or it's usually not the best reasons that they're not living with their family anymore. But also watching people like applying to colleges and how they're dealing with the stress of senior year, and just all those things have been really interesting to see, and kind of preparing me for all those things has been really interesting, but also kind of stressful to watch, just like knowing that that's imminent.
Yeah. Well, we are running out of time, but I just want to thank you for sharing about your life and what you're thinking about right now. And as I said, I have really enjoyed getting to watch you learn, just growing up into a young adulthood, learning how to manage your time, how to deal with stress, and all those things, and just really appreciating getting to witness you growing into your adulthood. So before we go, I'm just gonna pull this cake over here for you. Do you want to grab one and pull it over here? Get the dish towel because it's a little hot, and we'll show people. Yeah, just bring one over, and we'll show people it puffed up nicely. I'll show folks.
It's gorgeous.
So here's a cake, and it has it's very tender. This is a really moist cake, so you got to let these cool. Back to the cake recipe, you got to let these cool, and then you can flip them, put a plate on top and flip them out onto a plate, peel the parchment off, or if you didn't use parchment, just flip it out. And if they puffed unevenly on top, you can just trim with a bread knife, just trim down the top so it's flat. If you're going to do a layer cake, and as I said, you can put jam in the middle. If you have frozen fruit, you can cook it up with a little bit of sugar, sweetener, and some corn starch or other kind of starch mixed into water to thicken it and make your own kind of homemade jam, which we do sometimes, and do a layer cake. I'll put some recipes up on thetableunderground.com. But if you want to do something real simple, so we're going to actually make these for some friends who are observing Ramadan, because we're sort of caked out after having a whole birthday cake. We're going to give these to some friends who are observing Ramadan. So I think we're probably going to just do like a simple glaze with some cocoa, powdered sugar, maybe a little coffee, maybe some spices, and just do a little glaze over them. So we'll have 3 individual cakes that we can give away. And then that's basically all there is to the cake. I'll put the recipe up on thetableunderground.com. And I want to encourage people to continue to support mutual aid efforts, stand in solidarity with people who are frontline workers, people who are impacted most by this pandemic. I will put the information up on thetableunderground.com. I have a lot of local info for New Haven of grassroots mutual aid efforts like the Samia Collective, CT Core, the Undocu Up in Hartford, Connecticut Mutual Aid Fund. ULA has a group. There's a whole bunch of different folks who are raising money, both to get money and food directly out to people who really, really need it. And a lot of these efforts are being funded. But if you're in a different area, just do some Googling, do some asking around, and please help folks out. And also just do mutual aid on the direct person-to-person front. So I know some people in my community who don't have a car or don't have money to buy groceries, and I'm doing everything I can to try to help them out, pack up food in my house to bring to people and different things like that. I just want to encourage folks to do what you can. And if you are someone in need, please reach out to those mutual aid groups or other social justice, social service groups for aid. People are really trying to help each other right now. So you're listening to The Table Underground. I'm your host, Tagan Engel, and I thank you for joining us today. This is 103.5 WNHH in New Haven, Connecticut from the New Haven Independent. Thank you for listening.